The AC hummed low above us as my daughter leaned in and said, "Change the locks while she's still at lunch." Still, I didn't flinch, just folded my hands like any mother too proud to beg. As her voice dipped sweetly for the waiter, the cold air traced my cheek like a final warning. While she posed for photos beside me, I felt motherhood crack. Not loud, just clean. The same girl I once held through fevers now plotted my erasure over quiche. That's when I decided, if she could sever blood that easily, I could bury guilt just as soft. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. I didn't want a birthday lunch, Melissa insisted. "It'll just be something small," she said over the phone a few nights ago, her tone clipped, rehearsed. "Lila's free, Eric too. I already made the reservation." She didn't ask, she announced. I should have said no, but something in me, the part that still craved civility, or maybe just proof that they could pretend to love me for an hour, agreed. The cafe was all windows and white tile, trendy in a way that made me feel like I'd been airlifted into someone else's life. Melissa had chosen it, of course. I arrived 10 minutes early. They arrived 20 minutes late. "Happy birthday, Mom," Melissa said, brushing my cheek like she was greeting a coworker, not the woman who raised her. Lila followed, offering a more genuine hug. Eric came last, silent, stiff. I didn't expect warmth from him anymore. The waiter brought water. Melissa scrolled through her phone. Lila tried to make conversation, but Melissa talked over her, rattling off details about a client's nightmare renovation. I nodded where I could. I didn't recognize half the names. I wasn't meant to. Midway through lunch, just as I was cutting into my quiche, Melissa leaned toward Eric. I caught the glint of her phone on the table, screen angled down. Her voice dropped, just enough. "While everyone's here," she murmured, "go change the locks. She's not coming back tonight." My fork paused midair. The words cut through the clatter of dishes, slicing through the soft jazz playing overhead. My hand trembled. I set the fork down carefully, folding both hands in my lap. My coffee cooled beside me. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. I knew that tone. I'd raised that tone. That was the voice Melissa used when she wanted to wound quietly, a weapon disguised as logistics. She was orchestrating my erasure over chicken salad and sparkling water. The silence stretched. Then, as if nothing had happened, the waiter reappeared, balancing a tiny chocolate cake. "Happy birthday, Nora!" he beamed. Melissa clapped lightly, motioning for a photo. Lila hesitated but lifted her phone. I felt the click of a picture being taken, my face frozen somewhere between shame and shock. Melissa smiled wide, one hand on my shoulder like a claim. "Make a wish, Mom," she chirped. I looked at the single candle, one flame wobbling under the cafe's AC vent. I inhaled slowly, made my wish. Let them regret underestimating me. I blew out the candle. The smoke curled up and disappeared. Across the table, Lila's phone buzzed. She glanced down, then up. Her eyes met mine. She didn't say a word. But a moment later, my phone buzzed in my purse. I slipped it out. "Lila, you heard that, didn't you?" I looked at her. She blinked twice. A silent apology, or maybe just confirmation. I typed back, slowly. "Me." Every word. The cake tasted like cardboard. I took one polite bite and set the fork down. Melissa was still smiling for photos, adjusting her necklace, asking the waiter to get one with just the girls. I obliged. Barely. As they posed, I watched Eric pull out his phone under the table, texting someone, a locksmith, maybe. I didn't cry, not even when Melissa kissed my cheek again and said, "Don't be a stranger, okay?" As if I'd decided to leave instead of being pushed out. Outside, the sky had gone flat with early October gray. I stood by the curb while Lila called for a ride share. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, quietly, "I didn't know they were doing that today." I nodded, staring down the street. "They've been planning it longer than that." Lila's eyes brimmed, but she bit it back. She always had more of me in her than she wanted to admit. Her phone buzzed. "Driver's almost here. I'll ride with you." I shook my head. "Go home, baby. I'm fine." She looked like she didn't believe me, but she left, and I stood there, alone on the sidewalk, watching my own breath fog the air, my house key growing colder in my pocket, knowing full well it wouldn't open a single door tonight. I took the long way home. It was stupid. I knew it. But I wanted the air, the quiet, wanted to see the neighborhood the way it looked before everything twisted. Kids' bikes in driveways, orange porch pumpkins, the flicker of TV light behind curtains. I passed the big oak near the curb and remembered the year Eric fell out of it and broke his arm. He'd cried all the way to the ER. I carried him, bloody elbow and all. Now he was inside my house changing the locks. By the time I got to the porch, the sun had dropped. The porch light was off. Not burned out, deliberately off. My hand found the key, the same one I'd carried for 22 years. I slid it into the lock, turned. Resistance. I tried again. Nothing. I didn't knock. I just stood there, blinking at the dark wood of my own front door. Then I noticed it. The suitcase, tucked against the step like a stray dog. My suitcase. The red one I used for weekends at my sister's when the kids were little and Melissa would scream she couldn't stand the noise. The handle was worn. The zipper was bent. It had been packed in a rush. The door cracked open, just a sliver. Melissa didn't step outside. She never would. She stayed in the warmth, her face pale and too close to the gap. "It's better this way," she said softly, like she was trying not to wake a sleeping child. I didn't move. "You planned this?" She didn't answer. Then behind her, Eric's voice. Quieter, more cowardly. "We'll talk tomorrow." I laughed. It came out wrong, too sharp, too tired. "No," I said. "You'll listen tomorrow." Melissa flinched. I think part of her thought I'd cry, that I'd beg, that I'd collapse into the porch swing like some discarded woman from a movie, mumbling about all the things I'd done for them. But I didn't. I picked up the suitcase. It was heavier than I expected, probably full of whatever Melissa decided was mine. I didn't bother checking. I just stepped back down the walk, heels cracking against the concrete. No one followed. By the time I reached the corner, the porch light flicked on. Of course it did. It was never about safety. It was about appearances. God forbid the neighbors ask why Nora Hartley was standing in the dark with a suitcase like a tenant who'd missed the rent. I walked 4 blocks in the cold. My shoulder ached from the suitcase. My phone buzzed once. A spam email. I found a motel near the highway, the kind with numbers on the doors and scratchy polyester bedspreads. I paid cash, asked for a second-floor room, and locked the door behind me. The heat took a while to kick in. I sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on, suitcase unopened. Then I reached for my phone. Lila picked up fast. Her voice cracked like she'd been waiting. "Mom?" "They changed the locks," I said. "Told me it's better this way." Silence. "Where are you?" "A motel near Route 6. Nothing fancy." Jesus, Mom. I'm fine, I said, and I meant it. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't confused. I wasn't second-guessing what I'd heard or wondering if I'd misunderstood the mood in the room. I want to talk, I said, about something real. Okay. They changed my locks, Lila. She exhaled. Let's change my life. On the other end, Lila didn't speak for a moment. Then, okay, let's do it. I leaned back against the pillows, the heater wheezing in the corner, the hallway light slipping in under the door. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time in years, they didn't either. Lila showed up just after 7, headlights cutting across the motel parking lot like a searchlight. I was already outside, suitcase by my feet, coat buttoned tight. She didn't say anything when I climbed into the passenger seat. She just reached over and squeezed my wrist. Breakfast first, she said. You haven't eaten. I nodded. I hadn't slept either. She took me to a diner out by the river, the kind that hadn't changed its menu since 1983. I used to take her here after school recitals, a grilled cheese and a milkshake if she smiled through the whole performance, even when she missed a note. Now she was the one sliding the cracked plastic menu across the table. You gonna fight them? She asked. Her voice was soft, but it held something underneath. Not fear, something like hope. I stirred the sugar into my coffee. My hands had stopped shaking. Not with fists, I said. With facts. Lila blinked, her brow furrowing. What facts? I sipped the coffee, burned my tongue a little. The house. I co-signed the mortgage when Eric first bought it. He couldn't get approved on his own. His credit was too new. That was, what, 15 years ago? 16. I wrote the down payment check myself. She frowned, thinking, but you're not living there anymore. Not by choice. Lila leaned back in the booth. You think you're still on the paperwork? I don't think, I said, folding my napkin slowly. I know. The day we closed, I sat right there at the title company with a stack of documents thick as a Bible. I remember the woman's perfume. Gardenia. You remember the perfume, but not if you're still on the deed? I gave her a look. Mothers remember the details that matter. The waitress came with our food. I couldn't touch mine. Lila ate slowly, watching me between bites. You want to go to the county records office, she said, like it was her idea. I nodded. You mind driving? She shook her head. Let's go see what your facts are worth. The building was beige and forgettable, tucked between a shuttered bookstore and an insurance agency that hadn't updated its logo since dial-up internet. Inside, the air smelled faintly of toner ink and coffee from an old pot. The woman at the records desk wore a blue cardigan and a gold name tag, Sharon. She smiled at Lila, then looked at me, like she couldn't quite place where she'd seen my face. I'm looking for the title history on a property, I said, steady. 2243 Cedar Drive, should be under the name Eric Hartley, possibly co-owned. Sharon typed with 2 fingers. Date of purchase? June 2009. She nodded slowly, scrolling. Lila stood beside me, silent but close. I could feel her pulse in the air, taut and nervous. Sharon clicked her mouse once, twice. Then, here we go. Yep. Property was purchased in June 2009 by Eric Hartley and Nora Hartley as joint tenants. Lila let out a small sound, a laugh, or maybe just a breath she'd been holding. Still current? I asked. Sharon clicked again. Let's see. Nope. No transfer recorded. You're still on the deed, ma'am. 40% interest. I blinked. 40? She nodded. Your contributions itemized in the closing documents. Down payment plus you covered escrow. That's a substantial financial interest. My lips curved, not into a smile. Exactly. Just the beginning of one. A warning line. Thank you, Sharon. I didn't need a copy, not yet. The fact was enough for now. Lila followed me out to the car, eyes wide. Mom, he changed the locks. On your house. I opened the passenger door. He did. She turned to me, still holding her keys, stunned. What are you going to do? I buckled my seatbelt, watching a leaf skitter across the hood. The wind had picked up again, colder now, slicing through my coat like paper. I'm going to knock, I said quietly. And when he doesn't open the door, I'm going to show him what it costs to pretend I never existed. Lila stared at me. Then, for the first time in months, she smiled, not out of pity, not from worry, but something deeper. Pride, maybe. Let's make a plan, she said. I nodded, and as we pulled away from the records office, heading back toward a war I never wanted but was finally ready to win, I felt it settle in my chest. Not rage, not sadness. Resolve. Ben Crawford's office still smelled like old wood and ambition. The same paneled walls, the same crooked diploma from the University of Michigan hanging just a little off-center. He'd never fixed it. I used to tease him about that. When I stepped inside, he was leaning over a stack of papers, reading glasses halfway down his nose. For a second, he didn't recognize me. Or maybe he didn't trust his own eyes. Then his mouth broke into a slow grin. Well, I'll be damned, he said, standing. Nora Hartley. I smiled faintly. Still working yourself into an early heart attack, I see. He laughed, coming around the desk to hug me. He smelled of ink and peppermint gum. You look the same. Maybe tougher. I've had practice. He pulled back, studying my face. When you called, you sounded determined. And that's usually bad news for somebody else. I sat down, smoothing my skirt. That's the idea. He sank back into his chair, still watching me. All right, Nora. Start from the beginning. So I did. I told him everything, from the birthday lunch that wasn't really a birthday, to the locks, to the red suitcase on the step. His expression barely moved, but I saw it. The tightening at the jaw, the way his hand curled slightly into a fist when I said, she told him to do it while everyone was there. When I finished, he exhaled slowly and leaned back. You always knew how to pick a dramatic moment. Apparently, so did they. And you're still on the deed? 40%, I said. I checked this morning. Ben let out a low whistle. You've been sitting on gold, and they tried to bury you in dirt. He stood, pacing once behind the desk, thinking. The air between us filled with quiet calculation. It was the same look he'd had the day I found him crying in his car 25 years ago, after the county board tried to revoke his license for a clerical error that wasn't his fault. I'd spoken at that hearing, spent 3 hours defending him until they dropped the charges. He remembered it too. I saw it click in his eyes when he stopped pacing and said softly, You saved my career back then. What do you need now? I folded my hands. I need them to understand what a signature means, what my name means on a contract. He nodded once. Then they're about to learn what paper means. He pulled a legal pad toward him, jotting quick notes. Shorthand I couldn't follow, but trusted instinctively. Then he looked up. You said Eric's name is first on the mortgage? Yes. Doesn't matter. You're on the title, joint tenancy, undivided interest. That means he can't refinance, can't sell, can't even take out a home equity loan without your consent. You hold a veto. Can we make sure he knows that? He smiled, Small, sharp, better. We'll make sure the bank does. He started drafting, fingers moving over the keyboard like he'd been waiting for a fight. Every few minutes he muttered to himself, affidavit of interest, injunctive notice, yes, perfect. The printer hummed to life, spitting out crisp sheets of white that smelled faintly of toner and victory. When he slid the first document across the desk, I read the title, Notice of Co-Ownership Interest and Hold-on Transactional Rights. Plain English? I asked. This, Ben said, tapping the top page, tells every lender, every broker, and every title company in the county that the property at 2243 Cedar Drive cannot be sold, refinanced, or transferred without your written approval. Period. It's a legal freeze. If he tries to move money, they'll call me first. I stared at the paper. My name printed in bold. Nora Hartley. The same name Melissa had erased from the mailbox label last winter when she redid the porch for curb appeal. Good, I said quietly. Let them feel trapped where they tried to trap me. Ben's eyes softened. You really want to go through with this? I'm not burning the house down, I said. I'm just locking the right doors. He chuckled. That's the Nora I remember. When I signed the final page, my hand didn't shake. Ben gathered the documents, clipped them neatly, and placed them in a manila envelope. I'll have these filed by morning, he said. And Nora, if they try anything, call me first. Not them. I nodded. I'm done calling them. As I stood to leave, he said, You always did have a way of making people underestimate you. I paused at the door. That's their favorite mistake. Outside, the afternoon light had turned the windows amber. Lila was waiting in the car, engine running, music low. She saw the envelope in my hands and raised her brows. Well? I slid into the seat, closing the door gently. The first counter move just landed. Lila smiled. You're playing chess. No, I said, buckling in. I'm ending checkmate. We drove in silence for a while, the road unwinding beneath us, the edges of autumn spinning past the windshield. Somewhere behind those trees, behind those closed blinds and quiet living rooms, the war had already begun. Quietly, efficiently, on paper. And for once, I wasn't the one losing sleep over it. The first sound of trouble wasn't thunder or sirens. It was Melissa's voice leaving a furious voicemail 2 days later. I was sitting by the motel window with a library paperback open in my lap when the phone buzzed. The light outside was thin, autumn yellow, the kind that makes everything look like a memory. I didn't answer. I just let it play. Her voice came through sharp, controlled, the kind of calm that only exists when someone's already losing control. Mother, what did you do? She hissed. The bank says there's a problem with the title. Something about your signature being required. You have no right to interfere with our finances. Call me back. I closed the book, smiled a little. It had taken less than 48 hours. Earlier that morning, across town, Melissa had marched into First Western Bank in her camel coat and heels that sounded like war drums against the tile. Eric trailed behind her, phone in hand, eyes down. She hadn't told him about the overdue credit cards or the home improvement loan she'd used to redo the kitchen backsplash she now claimed she hated. She just needed the refinance approved, quick money to patch the bleeding before anyone noticed. At the counter, the young loan officer smiled politely. You're here to finalize the refinance, Mrs. Hartley? Yes, Melissa said, smoothing her folder on the counter. Everything's been pre-approved. I just need to sign. He clicked through the computer, nodding until the screen froze. His brow furrowed. He clicked again. I'm sorry, ma'am. There's a hold on this property. A what? He adjusted his glasses. It says here, notice of co-ownership interest filed 3 days ago. Requires dual consent. Melissa blinked. Dual consent? Yes, ma'am. Both owners must sign off on any loan, sale, or transfer. She frowned, leaning over the counter. I'm the owner. The man hesitated. It lists two, Eric Hartley and Nora Hartley. Behind her, Eric's head jerked up. Wait, what? Melissa turned, her voice snapping. You said she transferred it. I thought she did. Years ago. Didn't she? The loan officer looked back and forth between them, trying to disappear. So, just to clarify, Mrs. Hartley, you'll need Ms. Hartley's written consent to proceed. Otherwise, the refinance can't be approved. Melissa's lips went white around the edges. She's not Ms. Hartley. She's my mother. I understand, the man said gently, but legally, she's your co-owner. Eric ran a hand through his hair. This can't be right. The man tapped the screen. Says here it was just reaffirmed by attorney Ben Crawford's office. Everything looks current. Melissa's voice dropped to a whisper, venomous and low. She did this on purpose. Ma'am, the man said. She ignored him, turned to Eric. We can't even pull money out. Do you understand what that means? Eric's face flushed. What do you want me to do? Fix it, she hissed. I don't care how. Just fix it. They stormed out, heels and frustration echoing through the lobby. The clerk watched them go, shaking his head, and quietly marked their file as pending legal restriction. By late afternoon, my voicemail held 3 messages. The first was Melissa's, clipped, furious, restrained only by her pride. The second was Eric's, his voice cracking between apology and blame. Mom, listen, I didn't know. I thought your name was off the house, okay? Melissa's just stressed. Maybe we can work this out if you'd just, I don't know, come by? The third was silence for 6 whole seconds before Melissa spoke again. Quieter now, colder. You think you're clever? You're not. You're just lonely. I didn't delete any of them. Instead, I went downstairs to the motel's tiny breakfast nook, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat by the vending machine light. The hum of the soda fridge filled the quiet. Lila's car would pull up in an hour. We had errands to run. But for that small slice of morning, I let myself feel something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Not revenge. Not satisfaction. Just steadiness. They'd built their comfort on the assumption that I wouldn't fight back. That I'd fade politely. That paperwork, like people, could be ignored. But paper had teeth. I took a sip of coffee, bitter and perfect, and pulled a napkin toward me. On it, I wrote a single line in the clean, steady handwriting I used to sign permission slips and report cards. Step 1 complete. They can't buy me out, and they can't sell me out. When Lila arrived, she found me at the table, pen still in hand. What's that? She asked, nodding to the napkin. Just a reminder, I said, folding it neatly and tucking it into my purse. For them, mostly. Lila smiled. You're enjoying this? Not yet, I said, standing. But I will. We stepped out into the parking lot, the sky breaking open with a pale light that looked almost forgiving. It wasn't. Not yet. Because if they thought a frozen deed was the end of this, they hadn't learned a thing about the woman they'd tried to lock out. Lila slid into the booth across from me at Lucy's diner, already bracing herself. They're saying you wandered off. I raised an eyebrow over my tea. Wandered off? She nodded, lips tight. Melissa told Pam Latimer you had some sort of spell. That you've been confused, not yourself. Eric backed it up. Said you refused to come home and they're giving you space out of respect. I stared at the sugar packets in the tin between us. Yellow, blue, pink, all fake. Just like the story. And people are buying it? I asked, quieter now. Lila gave me a tired look. You know how this town works. Everyone fills in the blanks with the version that makes them feel safest. It's easier to believe a woman your age got confused than to believe her kids locked her out. I stirred my tea, slow circles. They're using your silence against you, she said. I looked up. Then I'll weaponize their spotlight. Lila blinked. What does that mean? But I was already pulling out my phone. 3 days later, I showed up at the Westside Community Center at 8:15 in the morning with a box of old clothes and a clipboard tucked under my arm. Most people hadn't seen me since the bake sales back when Lila was in middle school. But the staff remembered. They always do. The ones who build things from scratch, who count every donated sock. By the end of the week, I was coordinating Wednesday night meal prep and helping with resume clinics in the side room where the printer jammed every 15 minutes. I didn't know you were back, one of the women said, folding t-shirts by my side. I never left, I said with a small smile. People notice presence more than absence. I didn't need to shout. I just needed to show up. The town newsletter ran a photo of us the next week. A shot of me stirring a pot of chili with 3 volunteers laughing in the background. The caption read, "Local widow helps families rebuild after loss." The widow part was true. My husband died 9 years ago. The rebuild part, well, that was true too, just not in the way they assumed. By week 2, people had started talking again, but this time in tones shaded with curiosity, not pity. I saw Nora at the food drive. Didn't know she was so involved. She looks good, stronger than she used to. Doesn't really seem like someone who wandered off confused, does she? Melissa's social circle ran on optics, brunches, Instagram posts with curated captions, charity galas with just enough heartfelt backstory to feel noble. So when my face started appearing in those same spaces, candid, grounded, real, the shift wasn't seismic. It was slow, but it was coming. At the Saturday farmers market, I overheard 2 women whispering by the cider stand. One leaned in and said, "You think maybe Melissa's version wasn't entirely true?" The other shrugged, non-committal, but neither defended her. That was the crack I needed. Lila picked me up that afternoon, coffee in one hand, her phone in the other. "Someone sent me this," she said, holding out the screen. It was a screenshot from a neighborhood Facebook group. A woman had posted the newsletter photo with a caption, "Love seeing Nora Hartley back in the community. Always had the biggest heart." I handed the phone back without smiling. Let them build the story for me. Lila stared at me for a moment. You really don't want to correct them? What's more effective, I said, me telling them my side, or letting their doubt dismantle hers? She exhaled. You're playing a longer game than they are. I nodded. Because I'm not trying to win in public. I'm trying to live in peace. But if they've chosen public, I'll meet them there. By the following Tuesday, Melissa showed up to her Pilates class 15 minutes early and found half the room already talking about me. Did you see the article? One woman asked. God, if I'm that sharp at her age, I'll be lucky. Melissa smiled, tight, practiced, and changed the subject. But her cheeks burned red the whole hour. Back at the motel, I opened my notebook and crossed off another line. Control the narrative before they do. One by one, the boxes were being checked. But as I closed the notebook, my phone buzzed again. This time, a name I hadn't expected. Eric. Text. Can we talk? Just you and me. For a second, I stared at the screen, not because I believed it would be kind, but because it meant something had shifted. I didn't reply. Not yet. Some things deserve silence. Others deserve strategy. And this one? This one would need both. Ben's office looked different this time. Same mismatched chairs, same stained mug on his desk. But the mood had shifted. He leaned back with one ankle crossed over the other, tapping his pen against his knee. You know, he said, we could press for repayment. Force them into negotiations. You've got 40% equity, and now that they can't refinance, they're stuck. A demand letter could put them on their heels. I nodded but didn't answer right away. He waited. He knew me well enough not to push. Finally, I said, not yet. His brows rose slightly. Let them hang by their own arrogance first, I said. Ben chuckled. You always did have a taste for long plays. Only when they earn it. I left without signing anything new. There was still more power in waiting, in watching. And sure enough, within 2 days, the next piece moved on its own. It was a Thursday afternoon when I heard the knock at the motel door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it slowly, and there she was. Chloe. 12 years old, in her purple hoodie, backpack straps pulled tight like a life vest. She stood there blinking up at me, unsure whether to speak or cry. Mom doesn't know I'm here, she said quickly. I told her I had a makeup music lesson. I stepped aside and let her in. She sat on the edge of the bed like she didn't know if she'd be scolded or hugged. Her hands stayed folded in her lap, knees pressed together. I made tea just to fill the silence. She said you left because you were being mean, Chloe said softly. The words sat in the air like something chipped and fragile. I passed her the tea and sat beside her. That's not true, I said. I figured, she whispered. But everyone keeps acting like you're gone. I touched her hand gently. Chloe, listen to me. Never believe that kindness means weakness, or that silence means guilt. She nodded slowly. I didn't leave because I was mean. I left because they made it impossible to stay, and because sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is refuse to stay where they're being erased. Chloe's eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. Instead, she leaned into me, resting her head against my shoulder. I wrapped my arms around her and held her until her breath slowed again. When she left, I didn't tell her to keep our visit secret. She already knew. Later that night, Lila came by with Chinese takeout and that tight look she got whenever she felt outpaced. You're turning this whole thing into a chess match, she said, digging into her lo mein. No, I said, folding a dumpling. A mirror. She paused. What do you mean? I'm not inventing anything, I said. I'm just holding their behavior up where everyone can see it. If it embarrasses them, that's their own reflection they're upset about. Lila didn't argue. Instead, she reached for her phone and slid it across the table. I thought you should see this. A screenshot from the PTA group chat. Melissa. Honestly, my mother's not well. It's private. But we've been doing everything we can behind the scenes. Please respect our family's privacy. 3 crying emojis. 4 replies of, thinking of you. 1 politely worded, let us know if Nora needs anything. I set the phone down without blinking. Keep it, I said. What? I'm starting a file. Lila leaned back. A file? Yes, I said, calm as ever. Every time she lies, manipulates, or tries to rewrite the truth, I want it documented. For what? A lawsuit? Not yet, I said. But I want options and leverage. By midnight, I'd started printing. Screenshots of Melissa's texts to friends, half-truths wrapped in bows, notes from calls she'd made to check on me that were really just planting doubts, a copy of the community center newsletter, a notarized copy of the deed, a sticky note with the date Chloe had visited. It wasn't a manifesto. It was a mirror, bound in a 3-ring binder. By the time I zipped it shut, it was an inch thick. They wanted a clean break. What they were getting was a record. The next morning, I checked my email. One new message. Subject line, Re-concerned inquiry, Nora Hartley's story. It was from a local reporter. Small paper, circulation maybe 5,000. But she had clearly heard the whispers. Said she was working on a piece about housing disputes and older residents being displaced. Asked if I'd be willing to talk. I didn't answer right away. I just closed the laptop, looked out the window at the street below, and smiled faintly. The next move wasn't mine to make. It was theirs. And I had already given them every opportunity to act right. Now, I was just keeping score. The letter from Ben's office arrived on a Wednesday. Certified mail. Clean envelope. Heavy with consequence. Melissa opened it at the kitchen island, still in her tennis gear, smoothie glass sweating beside her. Eric sat across from her, scrolling his phone until her sharp inhale caught his attention. What is it? She held the letter like it might burn her fingers. It's from Ben Crawford. Eric took it, reading silently. His mouth tightened. Request for full accounting of shared property expenses, utilities, taxes, repairs, home improvements. He looked up. She's asking to see everything. She's bluffing. No, he said flatly. She's not. Melissa grabbed the letter back. She can't just demand this. Eric's jaw clenched. She co-owns 40%. She absolutely can. Melissa turned away, muttering, Unbelievable. I gave her everything. From upstairs, a small thump, then the soft creak of Chloe's door opening. They didn't know I was already halfway up the walk. I hadn't told Lila, hadn't planned it like the others. But something about that letter, the weight of it, the ripple I knew it would send through Melissa's perfect kitchen, made me want to see it land. I wore a navy coat and clean boots, hair pulled back. I didn't come with fire. I came with facts. The porch still had the autumn wreath I bought from Chloe's school fundraiser last year. Funny, what they kept. I rang the bell. Inside, footsteps. A pause. Then the door cracked open, and Melissa's face turned to stone. You can't just show up here? She said. Actually, I said calmly, I can. She blinked. And according to the deed, I added, stepping over the threshold. This hallway is mine. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Behind her, Eric stood near the stairwell, frozen like he hadn't decided whether to speak or shrink. Mom? Chloe's voice floated from above. Then the soft thump of socks on stairs. She appeared, wide-eyed, then smiled, pure and unfiltered. Grandma! She ran past Melissa and threw her arms around me. I hugged her tight, burying my face in her hair just for a moment. It still smelled like the same drugstore shampoo I used to buy for Lila, lavender and peach. Melissa snapped, Chloe, upstairs, now! Chloe clung tighter. But she's my grandma. Chloe. I let her go gently. It's okay, sweetheart. I'll only be a minute. She gave me one last squeeze, then shuffled up the stairs reluctantly, throwing a glare over her shoulder at her mother. When I turned back, Melissa was already stepping into my space, voice a low hiss. What's your game here? No game, I said. Just accountability. You think you're intimidating? I think I'm inconvenient, I said. Which is different and more permanent. Eric hadn't moved, but when I looked at him, his eyes dropped. Ashamed, or maybe just tired of pretending not to be. You were supposed to be gone, Melissa said. I smiled faintly. And yet, here we are. I pulled a copy of Ben's letter from my coat pocket and placed it gently on the console table. The one I helped her pick out at the consignment store 5 years ago. Have your accountant respond within 10 business days, I said. You don't belong in this house anymore. I leaned in, voice soft but steady. Next time you change locks, I whispered, check who paid for the key. Her face flushed, rage crawling beneath her foundation. I stepped back, buttoned my coat, and looked once more toward the stairs. Chloe was peeking around the corner, eyes wide. I gave her the smallest nod, then turned and walked out the door without another word. The air outside was crisp, cold enough to catch in the lungs. I didn't rush. I walked slow, letting my heels echo across the porch and down the steps like punctuation. As I reached the sidewalk, my phone buzzed. A new voicemail, unknown number. I pressed play. A man's voice, cautious. Hi, Mrs. Hartley. My name is Greg Pierce. I'm a reporter with the Ledger. I believe your daughter may have misrepresented some things about your condition. Would you be willing to speak on the record? I didn't smile. I just kept walking, because the story they wrote about me was beginning to unravel. And this time, I was holding the pen. The photo wasn't staged. Someone snapped it during a Saturday ceremony at the West Side Rec Hall. A candid moment. Me holding a small bronze plaque, blinking against the sun. The inscription read, "With quiet gratitude, to Nora Hartley Bennett for rebuilding more than walls." I hadn't expected the mayor's assistant to call me up. I hadn't wanted it. But I stood anyway, accepted the plaque with both hands, and thanked no one in particular. Then I returned to my folding chair, feeling the weight of that small, polished rectangle settle like a final nail, but not in my coffin, in theirs. 2 days later, the local paper ran the story. Small towns, big hearts, the women behind West Side's recovery. There I was, half a page down, smiling faintly. The quote was simple. Nora Bennett, retired school secretary and longtime resident, quietly donated funds to restore 3 storm-damaged homes last fall. People needed help, she said. I had a little extra. They never mentioned Melissa. They didn't need to. At the next community brunch, held in the courtyard of the Methodist Church, Melissa arrived 20 minutes late in a navy wrap dress and a forced smile. The crowd wasn't as thick as it used to be. The weather was perfect. Still, something in the air had shifted. She was halfway through a plastic flute of orange juice when Pam Latimer approached. Melissa, wasn't your mother-in-law the one who funded the Monroe Street rebuild? Melissa blinked, her jaw clenching just a second too long. Well, she's done some volunteering, sure. Oh, not just that, Pam said, eyes glittering. The mayor's assistant thanked her by name. Don't tell me you missed the article. Melissa smiled, brittle and pale. It's been a hectic week. Behind Pam, 2 more women nodded. She looked so elegant holding that plaque, someone said. Just strong. Melissa tilted her head. You know she's been staying at the motel off Route 6, right? There was a pause, subtle but sharp. The kind that makes your stomach sink before your mind catches up. Pam offered a tight-lipped smile. Doesn't seem to have slowed her down. Melissa didn't finish her drink. Across town, Eric sat in a sleek, glass-walled conference room, watching two investors scroll silently through a digital article on an iPad. One tapped the screen. "This is your mother?" Eric nodded. "Yes. Well, technically my mother. Long story. She seems organized," the other man said dryly. The silence that followed felt like a verdict. "We're not trying to be invasive," the first added. "But when we see a potential partner tangled in public disputes with their co-owner, especially a blood relative, we have to ask ourselves what else could go off the rails." Eric forced a laugh. "It's not what it looks like. It's a private family matter." The two men exchanged a look that said exactly. By the time the meeting ended, they'd promised to circle back. But Eric knew better. No one circles back when the optics go sour. They circle away. Back at the motel, I didn't celebrate. I read the article once, folded it, slipped the clipping into the back of my notebook. I hadn't written a single word for 2 days. Not because I was done, but because the next moves would write themselves. That evening, Lila came by with a bag of groceries and 2 bottles of iced tea. "You've officially outmaneuvered them," she said, dropping onto the edge of the bed. "The brunch crowd is turning." I sat by the window, sipping slow. "I didn't plan that part," I said. "You didn't have to. Truth has gravity. Eventually, it pulls." There was something in her voice, not quite pride, something heavier, like awe mixed with worry. "What?" I asked. Lila hesitated. "You've changed." I smiled. "No, I just stopped shrinking." She didn't argue. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. "Eric, can we meet? Just you. No Melissa." I stared at the screen for a long time, then typed back, "Me. Your move. I'm not chasing you." The reply came a minute later. "Eric, tomorrow, noon, at Dad's bench." I hadn't been to that bench in 5 years, the one near the lake, where we scattered his ashes, where Eric once held my hand after the funeral and said, "Don't worry, I've got you now." And for a while, I believed him. But tomorrow, I'd find out what he meant this time. Melissa waited until the garage door rolled shut behind Eric before she said a word. She was standing in the laundry room, arms crossed over her chest, hair still perfectly curled for the brunch she left early. A full glass of red wine sat untouched on the dryer. "She's ruining us," she said. Eric kicked off his shoes, already tired. "It's not a great time, Melissa." "No," she said, following him into the kitchen, voice climbing. "You made it a great time when you invited her back into our lives like some ghost with receipts." Eric opened the fridge, grabbed a beer. "I didn't invite her. I just didn't stop her." Melissa scoffed. "Same thing." He popped the cap, took a long drink. "No, it's not. She's freezing accounts, calling lawyers, turning the whole town against me." Eric set the bottle down harder than he meant to. "You turned them against yourself. She didn't need to do a damn thing." Melissa blinked. He didn't yell. He didn't even raise his voice. But the words hit like a door slamming between them. She's not the one who lied about her mental state to Pam Latimer, or said she wandered off like she was senile. That was for optics. It was for you. He shook his head. "You lied. You spun the story. You kicked her out. And now you're mad she didn't stay gone?" "I gave her everything, Eric." "No," he said, quieter now. "You gave her reasons." Melissa's eyes narrowed. "You sound just like her." Eric grabbed the beer again. "Maybe I should have earlier." He walked out of the kitchen, and Melissa didn't follow. I didn't know what he wanted when he asked me to meet him, but when I showed up to the bench, he was already there. Slouched forward, tie loosened, a man unraveling slowly. We didn't talk about the past, or his meeting, or the press. We talked about Chloe, about her math scores, her violin recital, how she still added sugar to orange juice and thought nobody noticed. He didn't apologize, and I didn't demand it. But as I stood to leave, he asked quietly, "Are you planning to take the house?" I looked out over the lake. The breeze lifted the water just enough to ruffle the surface. "No," I said. "I'm just reclaiming my part of it." He nodded like he understood, but not enough to stop it. And I think he knew that too. I didn't tell Lila right away. I just started small. A framed photo from my storage unit, a box of cookbooks I'd nearly donated, my grandmother's mirror wrapped in a towel and carried gently into the front hall of my house. I didn't knock. I had keys again. Melissa wasn't home the first few times. Eric didn't say much, just nodded and moved out of the way, like a man halfway through surrender. It was Chloe who helped me set up the little desk in the back den. "Why don't you move the whole way back in?" she asked one afternoon, placing my pencil cup like it was sacred. "Because some things are better built piece by piece," I said. Lila came by that evening, leaning against the threshold as she watched me line up my tea tins in the kitchen. "You've broken their walls without raising your voice." I turned a tin so the label faced out. "That's what happens when you replace love with pride." She didn't say anything for a long time, then, "You don't even seem angry anymore." "I'm not." I paused. "I'm aware of who they are and who I've become because of it." Lila nodded slowly. "I think that scares them more than anything else." I smiled, just barely. It should. That night, I found a note under the wiper blade of my car. No envelope, just folded, damp at the corners. "You win. But don't think for a second that makes you right. M." I sat behind the wheel for a long time, headlights off, reading it twice. Then I folded it cleanly in half and slid it into the binder with the rest. Because this wasn't about winning, it was about returning. And I hadn't even finished unpacking. It started with an email. Subject line: "Urgent, filing alert, property transfer attempt." Ben called 10 minutes later. "You sitting down?" "I'm at the kitchen table," I said. "That count?" He sighed. "Melissa just filed a quit-claim deed for full ownership of the property. Claims you relinquished your share 2 years ago. She attached your signature." I set down my tea. "My what?" "Forged," he said flatly. "Poorly, too. The notary listed retired in 2018. Whoever prepped it didn't even bother checking the registry." "She's desperate," I said. "She's cornered," he corrected. "And cornered people do stupid things." There was a pause on the line, just the sound of paper shifting. "I've already sent the court notice. She'll be served by tomorrow. You'll want to attend the hearing." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "I'll be there." "Good," he said, and his voice softened. "Wear something that makes you feel untouchable." The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant, that mix of history and hand sanitizer. The judge's bench loomed high, the walls paneled in light oak. I'd been there before, years ago, for a zoning appeal. Never for something this personal. Melissa sat 2 rows ahead, immaculate as ever in cream and pearls. Eric beside her, eyes red-rimmed. He didn't look back at me when I entered. Chloe was at school. I was glad for that. Ben slid a file in front of me. "You don't need to speak unless the judge asks. Just keep your head up." The clerk called the case, Hartley versus Bennett. Melissa's lawyer, young, smooth-voiced, too confident, started first. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of rightful ownership. My client has maintained and improved the property exclusively for years, under the belief that Ben stood. Objection to premise. Ownership is not belief, it's record. And the record is crystal clear. The judge, a woman maybe in her late 60s, peered over her glasses. Mr. Crawford, you're asserting fraud? Document forgery, Ben said, calm but precise. The notary listed here retired 7 years prior to this alleged signature. My client, Mrs. Bennett, has never executed any such transfer. Melissa's lawyer blinked. We can provide supplemental documentation. Please don't, the judge interrupted. You're already deep enough in quicksand. A small ripple of laughter moved through the gallery. Melissa's jaw tightened. Her lawyer fumbled through papers, then whispered something to her. She didn't respond, just stared straight ahead, knuckles white around her folder. The judge turned to Ben. Mr. Crawford, your client's interest remains valid. Without Mrs. Bennett's consent, this filing is void ab initio. Melissa's lawyer opened his mouth as if to argue, but the judge cut him off. Counsel, I suggest you withdraw before you end your week unemployed. He glanced at Melissa, then quietly gathered his papers. Your Honor, my client and I will reconsider our position. Wise, the judge said. She tapped her gavel once. Case dismissed. Just like that. Ben leaned toward me, whispering, You can breathe now. But I already was. Outside, the autumn air was bright and sharp, the kind that feels newly laundered. Reporters were waiting on the courthouse steps, cameras slung over shoulders, microphones tilted like question marks. One of them, a woman I recognized from the ledger, stepped forward. Mrs. Bennett. Nora Bennett? We covered your volunteer initiative last month. Are you here regarding the Hartley property case? I paused. No comment would have been enough, no statement perfect. Silence, though silence was its own kind of headline. I gave a polite nod. Just tying up old paperwork, I said. The reporter smiled, sensing the understatement. Can we get a photo? Ben shot me a look, half warning, half amusement. I turned slightly toward the cameras, not posed, not defiant, just present. The flashes went off, quick, sharp, final. Behind me, through the courthouse doors, I heard the faint echo of Melissa's voice. Brittle, angry, breaking. But the microphones weren't pointed at her. Not anymore. I adjusted my coat collar and descended the steps slowly, each click of my heel landing like punctuation on a story I no longer needed to explain. Halfway down, Lila appeared at the curb, leaning against her car, arms crossed. Well? She said softly. Looks like the world caught up. I exhaled. About time. She tilted her head. Studying me. What are you thinking right now? That there's a difference between being right, I said, and being free. The cameras were still flashing behind us, catching what they thought was victory. But for me, it wasn't that. It was closure, carved not out of revenge, but return. And I had no plans to look back. It was Eric who knocked first. Not text, not voicemail. A knock. Soft, hesitant. The kind a child makes when they aren't sure if they'll be welcomed in. I opened the front door of our house and found him standing there in a gray sweatshirt and jeans, looking older than his years, younger than his guilt. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets. I let her do this to you, he said. Not hello, not even eye contact. Just that. I leaned against the door frame. You didn't stop her, I said. That's the same thing. He nodded once, like he'd rehearsed hearing it. Then he sat down on the porch step, head bowed, elbows on his knees. I thought if I stayed quiet, it wouldn't get worse. That if I kept the peace, eventually she'd come around. You'd both just go back to normal. I sat beside him, not close, but near enough that he could feel I hadn't turned away. You've always confused silence for safety, I said. You get that from your father? Eric laughed, wet and broken. He would have hated this. All of this. No, I said. He would have hated watching you pretend not to see it. That cracked something. He put his face in his hands and sobbed. Not a tear or two. Real, heaving grief. The kind that had been corked behind pride and denial for too many years. A child in a man's body. My boy. My mistake. In part. I didn't comfort him, but I didn't leave either. When he finally looked up, eyes swollen and ashamed, I said only this. Grief is fine, but at some point, you have to decide who you're going to be after it. Later that week, Chloe met me in the hallway, backpack slung over one shoulder, cheeks pink from the bus ride home. She looked up at me, hopeful. Can Grandma move back now? She asked. I smiled, crouching to her level. No, sweet girl. Grandma moves forward. She blinked. But forward's not here? Forward is wherever I get to be me, without being someone's secret or scapegoat. She nodded, even if she didn't fully understand. Okay, but forward can still have Friday movie nights, right? I grinned. Only if there's popcorn. That Friday, I met Grace at the diner, the only one still using laminated menus and pouring coffee from cracked carafes. She slid into the booth, dropping her oversized purse with a sigh. Half the PTA wants Melissa replaced as fundraising chair. I raised an eyebrow. That was fast. She tried to pivot to a wellness initiative, and someone asked what she was doing for her own mental health. I didn't smile, but I sipped my tea with intention. Grace leaned in. So what now? Now that they've seen it? That she can't spin it anymore? I folded the napkin in my lap. Now I focus on what outlives all of us. Grace blinked. Meaning? Legacy, I said. The kind they can't rewrite. She looked at me differently then, not like a woman who had survived something, but one who had built something through the rubble. I've got an idea, I added, slipping a sheet of paper from my purse. There's an empty wing at the community center. I think we can turn it into something permanent. Skills workshops, resource guides, legal basics for women who don't know their power yet. Grace smiled. You're not done. I'm just beginning. Back at the house, the porch was quiet. A leaf skittered across the steps. Melissa's car wasn't in the driveway. I didn't wonder where she was. I unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway. My hallway, where the walls held both history and the woman I'd fought to become. The air inside didn't feel tense anymore. Just quiet. Rested. In the entryway mirror, I caught my own reflection. Not older, not harder, just clearer. Ben stared at the document on his desk like it was a live wire. You're sure about this? He asked quietly. Once it's filed, there's no reversing it. I'm sure, I said. He nodded, exhaling through his nose. Then you'll be the first client I've ever had who weaponized generosity. Good, I said. It's about time someone did. He turned the pages slowly, his eyes moving over every clause I'd written by hand. The foundation paperwork had taken me 3 weeks, not out of indecision, but precision. The name, though, had come instantly, the Bennett House Fund, dedicated to supporting women forced out of their homes by coercion, control, or silence, funded by 40% of a single house. Mine. No. Ours. And now, theirs. When the certified letters went out, the silence that followed was almost louder than Melissa's rage had ever been. Eric called first. Mom, what is this? It's a deed transfer, I said simply. Half of the property now belongs to a registered 501(c)(3. Your half? Correct. His voice cracked. So you're evicting us? I'm giving you what you gave me, I said. A locked door. The difference is, mine has purpose. There was a long pause. Then, barely audible, Melissa's crying. I'm sure she is, I said softly. Loss feels different when you can't disguise it as control. He didn't hang up, but he didn't say goodbye either. The sound of quiet panic filled the line. Papers rustling, footsteps, a muffled sob, and then the click of disconnection. 60 days. That's what the nonprofit bylaws allowed for transfer of tenant rights. Ben had explained it 3 times, making sure I understood. I did. Melissa didn't. The first time I saw her afterward, she was standing in the front yard, hair unbrushed, robe tied too tight. A woman unaccustomed to being on the losing side of an ultimatum. You can't do this, she said. Her voice was hoarse, raw. This is our home. I looked past her at the house. Its clean lines, its garden I once planted, the porch I'd stood on when they'd shut me out. No, I said. It's a home. It just isn't yours anymore. She took a step forward. You're destroying your own family. I met her eyes evenly. You destroyed it when you confused dominance for love. She broke then. A sound that wasn't quite crying, more like a long, hollow exhale of everything she'd built her identity on. For the first time, I didn't feel pity. I felt clarity. Why would you do this? She asked, voice trembling. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at the window above the porch, where the light flickered, Chloe's room. Because some inherit trauma. Others transform it. But I said only this, because I can. She turned away, covering her face with her hands, shaking like something that had finally realized its power didn't extend beyond fear. When the final papers were signed, Ben read the closing line aloud. Proceeds, if liquidated, shall benefit women seeking refuge from familial displacement or financial coercion. He looked up at me. You wrote that. I live that, I said. He nodded once, his throat tightening. Melissa and Eric have 60 days to vacate. After that, the organization takes possession. Good, I said. Use the rest to help women who were told to be grateful for scraps. Ben folded the document carefully, sliding it into a sealed folder. You realize what this means, Nora? You just turned your erasure into infrastructure. I smiled faintly. Legacy is just revenge that learned compassion. He laughed quietly, but there was admiration in it. You never wanted the house back. No, I said, standing. I wanted to make sure no one else could be locked out of theirs. As I left his office, the late light spilled across the floor, amber and soft. Outside, the city hummed in motion. I stopped at the corner, breathing in the clean, cold air. Across the street, the foundation's temporary sign was already in the window of its new space. Coming soon, the Bennett House. I stood there for a moment, just watching. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was reclaiming anything. I'd already arrived. They held the ceremony in the converted chapel room at the new Bennett house. Whitewashed walls, borrowed folding chairs, and a podium someone had covered in wild flowers. It wasn't large, maybe 40 people if you counted the staff and the volunteers. But the weight in the room wasn't about size. It was about what had shifted, what had survived. The director of the foundation, a woman named Talia with silver-streaked curls and calloused hands, stood at the front holding a plaque that matched the one from the rec hall. Simple, wooden, etched with one name, Nora Bennett. For turning a door once slammed into one forever open. They called me up. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The standing ovation filled the space louder than anything I could have said. In the back row, Lila wiped under her eye, pretending it was just allergies. Grace clapped with both hands, sharp and proud. And in the front corner, Chloe sat with her feet swinging under her chair, a bouquet of supermarket tulips clutched in her lap. She grinned when I looked her way. Afterward, people approached in slow, reverent lines, not the way they approach a hero, but the way they approach someone who chose not to disappear. I didn't know the whole story, one woman said quietly. You didn't have to, I said. Now you know the result. Melissa and Eric moved into a rental on the far side of town. Tan siding, low fence. One of those developments where every house looks like it's trying not to be embarrassed. I didn't see it myself. I heard about it from Grace, who'd driven by and spotted Melissa in the driveway. She looked stunned, she said, like she'd just realized she wasn't important anymore. She never was, I said. Not in the way she thought. The whispers followed them, of course. Not scandalous ones. Just the kind that settle in grocery aisles and church vestibules. The kind that hum under the surface. She used to live on Cedar Drive, didn't she? Something with her mother-in-law, I think. Shame how that all played out. It wasn't shameful, though. It was justice in a whisper. Not shouted, not litigated. Just known. Chloe came over every Saturday, sometimes with a book, sometimes with nothing but questions. Can I help in the garden? Can we cook together like before? Do you think the house misses us? And once? Are you happier now? I looked at her across the breakfast table, her elbows on the placemat, her hair still tangled from sleep. I'm not just happier, I said. I'm whole. She didn't say anything back, just reached for my hand and held it like it was something to anchor to. It was. The condo was small. 2 bedrooms, light oak floors, and a view of a narrow street lined with maple trees. I bought it quietly, using money from years of freelance bookkeeping jobs, birthday checks I never cashed, and the savings I once thought I'd die without using. I didn't need more space. I just needed a door that opened to peace. One afternoon, Grace came by with sparkling cider and a bottle of good balsamic vinegar. Housewarming, she said, setting them on the counter. You picked well? I poured the cider into mismatched glasses, the only kind I'd bothered to unpack so far. You won, you know, she said. And you did it without hate. No, I said. I did it without waste. Grace raised an eyebrow. Hate wastes precision, I said. And I was very, very precise. She toasted her glass against mine. To quiet victories. To earned ones, I said. That night, I stood at my new window and watched the leaves dance in the dusk. Below, a girl walked a dog. Somewhere, a screen door creaked and a neighbor laughed. I wasn't missed in my old house. But I was expected here. And there was a difference between being tolerated and being welcome. This, finally, was the latter. The sky over West Side was the soft gold of late spring when I pulled up to the Bennett house, a year to the day since the ribbon cutting, a year since the locks, the courtrooms, the silence, the return. The old rec hall looked different now. Fresh paint, flower boxes in the windows, laughter spilling through the doors. The smell of coffee and soil and something baking filled the air. Out front, a banner flapped gently above the crowd. Community Honors, 1 year of the Bennett House Fund. Someone had strung twinkle lights through the maple trees, the kind of thing I would have done years ago, before my name was ever weaponized. I almost turned around when I saw how many people were there: neighbors, volunteers, reporters, half the city council. But then Lila spotted me from the stage stairs. "Mom, you made it." "Couldn't skip my own anniversary," I said, and took her hand as she helped me up. Inside the small hall, chairs filled every row. The mayor, a trim man with a bow tie and the kind of voice made for microphones, stepped forward as the applause swelled. "Tonight," he said, "we honor someone who turned betrayal into shelter, who showed us that dignity can be rebuilt, and that justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes, it just wears patience." He gestured toward me. Cameras flashed. My name rippled through the crowd like a held breath released. I stood, smoothing my jacket, and let the light hit me full on. I'd once hidden from flashbulbs, afraid of being misinterpreted. Now, there was nothing left to protect but truth. The mayor handed me a framed deed, the official documentation naming the Bennett House Fund as permanent property of the city's community trust. "For turning heartbreak into hope," the inscription read, "for turning a door once closed into one that never locks." The applause rolled through the hall again, not thunderous, not chaotic, just steady, real, a heartbeat. In the back, I saw him, Eric, standing near the exit, hands clasped in front of him, eyes wet but steady. When I met his gaze, he didn't try to approach. He just nodded. Once. Small, sincere. Before joining the applause. Melissa wasn't there. She wouldn't have known how to stand in a room where silence was in power. And that was all right. Some stories end with apologies. Ours ended with acknowledgement. After the ceremony, Chloe came barreling through the crowd, a bundle of energy and floral perfume from whatever spray she'd borrowed from Lila. "Grandma!" she shouted, hugging my waist so tight I nearly lost balance. "You're famous." I laughed, smoothing her hair. "No, sweetheart, I'm just free." She pulled back, frowning. "Free from what?" I thought of all of it. The closed doors, the careful words, the invisible shrinking that comes from loving people who measure worth by control. "From needing anyone's permission to exist," I said. Chloe tilted her head. "That's kind of famous," she said solemnly. I kissed her forehead. "Then I'll take that kind." Later, after the crowd drifted into the courtyard for cake and photos, I stepped out under the twinkle lights alone. The air was cool, soft, the same kind of night I'd once stood outside my locked house, key useless in my hand. Only now I wasn't locked out. I'd built the door. Behind me, laughter swelled again. Volunteers chatting, someone playing guitar off-key. The life I'd built didn't sparkle like revenge. It glowed like resolve. Grace found me, 2 paper cups of punch in hand. She passed me one and nodded toward the building. "You really did it." "I did," I said. She clinked her cup gently against mine. "To what?" I looked back at the lit windows, at the sound of women's voices rising, not in anger, but in planning, in rebuilding. "To the kind of home you can't lose," I said. Grace smiled. "And what's next?" I took a slow sip, tasting the sweetness and the quiet. "Legacy," I said again. "The kind they can't rewrite." The camera flashes behind us flickered one last time, catching the moment. 2 women standing under a banner, the night folding softly around them. And as I turned toward the lens, I said what I'd waited years to say. "They changed my locks once, but I changed the definition of home."